The Gerick Innovation Scholars Program at CSU Monterey Bay is funded by the CSUN HSI Equity Innovation Hub, and Apple supporting undergraduate researchers working on faculty-mentored research. Scholars develop a curated research identity through the development of a digital e-portfolio for the STEAM workforce or graduate school. Hello everyone, this is the third episode of Otterly Curious. I am here with Liam Campbell today.
Hello everyone.
I am Angelica, your host, and unfortunately our other host, Jordan, is sick. So leave a comment, tell him to feel better. I'm so excited to have Liam today to talk about his research. He is currently an innovation scholar, so whereas me and Jordan have already finished the program. So I'm really excited that you are our first current researcher.
Oh, a lot. Big shoes to fill, I guess. Oh my gosh.
Yes, big shoes. So I asked you to create a 6-word mission statement, and what did you come up with?
So I came up with small invaders can create huge impacts. And basically the reasoning behind that was even the smallest individuals can still have huge implications with the ecology and ecosystem of our local beautiful area and everything like that.
Okay, and can you describe your research in a way that everybody understands it? And what is your main research question?
Yeah, totally. So my research is kind of understanding the relationship between this non-native parasite and how it affects a bigger kind of fish-eating shorebird in the Elkhorn Slough and stuff. So a lot of my question reflects that. So it's basically, how does Cercaria batellaria, which is the parasite, affect shorebirds in the Elkhorn Slough?
Okay, I'm interested in what this means for our environment.
So really, at least for me, some of the real life issues were that it can hurt our conservation efforts in the Elkhorn Slough. So a lot of restoration efforts are currently being made to kind of help reverse some of our pollution and use of that land. So part of the implications of this is that because the species isn't native to that area, it could keep hurting the rest of the area, even though it's already been there for 80 plus years. It could spread even to a larger range. Yeah.
80 plus years and still have a huge impact. Impressive. And just a quick question, who is your mentor?
My mentor is Dr. Gerick Bergsma.
Okay. Can you walk me through the steps you take to gather and analyze data?
Yes. Basically, our first step, at least for the project, was analyzing snail densities and infection rates of the snail, because the snails were one of the first intermediate hosts, whereas the birds are the last intermediate hosts. So we were kind of inferring infection rate based off the snail densities that were present and their infection rates. So we collected snail densities, infection rates of the snails with the parasite in them, and then we also, at the same sites that we collected and tested the infection rate, we then kind of did bird surveys in a 2-hectare area to count however many shorebirds or fish-eating birds were in the area.
And then by gathering the abundance of the birds, you inferred that they had those same parasites.
Kind of, but in a somewhat different way. Since we already had the infection rates, we did count the birds that were there, but we singled out fish-eating birds that were there as well, because we thought that they would be one of the main drivers of the infection process.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And how did you collect the data from the snails? What did you have to do to see the parasites within the snails?
Well, it's a little graphic, but so we have to collect them at the site, then we transport them into a little tank that basically circulates fresh seawater into the little cup or environment that we put them in. And from there, we have to take the snails out within about a day or two. And we have to break the snail shells with...
Oh, no.
Yeah, unfortunately with a hammer, which is where some of the more chaotic bits occur. And from that, we have to kind of dissect the snail in a way to isolate its reproductive organs, which house the parasites.
So you essentially kill the snails.
Yeah, but they are invasive, so there's always a bright side to it, I guess.
Yeah, that is true. Can you give me an example of a setback in your work and what you learned from it?
Yeah, one of the biggest setbacks in my work has to be when we lost our permit to collect snails. So we had the permit for about, 6 months when I was doing the research initially, and then about October, November of last year it expired. So after that we were not able to collect snails, so it kind of put a halt to that part of the process, which was one of our more important aspects of the project, being that we were comparing the infection rates to the abundances, but we were still able to collect enough data prior to that to get a good result overall. Everything went fine with the bird surveys and everything like that.
Oh, that's good to hear. Can I ask why there was no renewal?
Because we were time limited, and since I was graduating this semester, we saw that waiting the 3 to 5 month grace period for them to get back to us and possibly even accept our new license wasn't a good use of our time, especially for just gathering snail infection rates. So we decided to kind of shift more bird focused and kind of gather more on those avian behaviors and such.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Did you have any prior experiences before you started this work?
Interesting enough, not with birds or snails or parasites or any of that. It was more focused on intertidal surveys because I am a marine science major. I was helping a friend out with their starfish survey, and then I was helping another friend out with their rainbow trout spawning survey, but nothing related to what I actually ended up doing for this research and for E-Rock and everything.
Okay, what skills did you have to learn for this research project?
One of the biggest ones was identifying the birds, as well as identifying the type of snail. So there is only one snail known to be in that area, or at least one cone snail, like Batellaria tremeteria, the snail that we were analyzing. But we still wanted to cover every piece of ground, making sure that there weren't any fakers or anything like that. So definitely learning how to identify the snail was one of the hardest parts because it's through a microscope, and I had not the most experience with microscopes. Like I had some, but it was only in class, and those were like intended exercises for you to look through the microscope, so they probably already had something set up. But then the bird identification was hard as well because there is about hundreds of birds at the Elkhorn Slough, and just being able to identify them by even sometimes sight, sound, one of the harder parts of the project.
What was the hardest bird you had to identify?
It's gotta be the gulls or the sandpipers that we look at. And it's just because they have very subtle differences like feet color or maybe shading differences that if you can't see them in the best lighting, you might overlook in some areas. So we just had to try our best with being able to identify most of those.
And you had to do it quick, I imagine, because they're flying. They're not just sitting there for you to identify. So yeah, that must have been really hard.
Yeah, and we also only had 15 minutes because it was a timed survey.
Oh.
So we would have to be able to identify it, or at least have some sort of idea of it within that 15-minute frame, which wasn't really the harder part. It was getting to like the exact species, which was the hardest, I'd say.
And were there different time frames for this 15-minute survey?
Yes, but most of them, if not all of them, occurred before or somewhere in between the realm of early morning to early afternoon. So like probably like a 4-hour difference between the surveys and such.
Okay, and why is that? Are the birds more active at those times?
Not necessarily. It was more due to human interference with birds. And because it's a little earlier in the morning, not as many people out on the roads and possibly scaring the birds away. And also kind of coordinating with tides at the beginning was one of our goals, and some of the better time slots are earlier in the morning as well.
Okay. How does your work fit into the larger context of the field?
I think it fits in a lot with marine conservation and overall freshwater, seawater kind of areas, so like slough areas, because a lot of those areas do house a lot of marine invertebrates, fishes, even birds, as we've kind of talked about. So I think a lot of it was really helpful in informing, the ecology of those areas, as well as what steps we can take in order to kind of bring back native life in these areas and to preserve the native life in those areas.
And why do you think bringing back the native species is important?
Ensuring that you have those native species is really important, just in ensuring ecological importance and significance. Take the ice plant, for example. Those are non-native plants, at least in Monterey, and they're everywhere now. So they can just spread as fast as possible and possibly take over areas that weren't supposed to be taken over by them.
Yeah. What do you hope to achieve with your work, both in the short term and the long term?
In the short term, I want to hope to inspire other people to kind of take on this work. By the outside look of it, it's not the most appealing. You have to kind of go in the mud and smell some pretty smelly things, especially in mudflat areas. But I think it's really important to even understand the smallest levels of biodiversity to kind of inform how we can make impact even on our level as humans and everything. And I'd say that goes the same for the long term, kind of re-inspiring new generations to kind of continue and everything like that.
Yeah. What has been the most surprising or rewarding aspect of your research?
The moment, at least for me, and I think even Gerick would say the same thing, finding out that we had significance of infection rate and bird species, because when we were going into this, a lot of prior primary literature hadn't really fully dived into that topic or dove into that topic, and so we were just kind of curious to see if we'd have any kind of results. And when we got significant results with fish-eating birds and infection rate, then we were like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest day ever, because like I said, we both were kind of going in not really knowing what to expect. Other than we know that fish-eating birds could have a big prevalence because in their native area they do. We haven't seen anything in Elkhorn Slough.
If you could start your research over again, what would you do differently?
I would go in kind of knowing more about the birds. I thought there were like 5 or 6 shorebirds that I was going to see, and it turns out there's 20, 30 of them that I see maybe on average. Yeah.
Did you ever think about using iNaturalist, or would that just take too long?
I actually have used iNaturalist for it, but they are only really helpful with some of the bigger fish-eating birds like herons or egrets, because they have the tendency to stand still for longer. Birds like gulls, terns, or other shorebirds have the tendency to fly off as soon as you see them, or maybe it's just me being loud. They have the tendency not to pick up the details of them, so they give a more generalized kind of view of it. But yeah, I've used them for egrets and stuff like that when I was first learning everything.
Okay, that's cool. What are further implications for your research?
So a lot of our data that we got concerning the relationship between fish-eating birds and the infection rate of this parasite were that we think 2 species were responsible for driving the infection rate of most of the sites, if not all, and those being brown pelicans and western gulls. And so a lot of our future implications would be looking into those individual species, probably even looking into habitat preferences and maybe even habitat selection, into ideas on how areas of transmission can be found, or even how that cycle can possibly even be slowed down a little bit to kind of help with getting rid of these invasive little parasites and stuff.
Okay. And are you graduating this semester?
Yes, I am graduating this semester.
And do you think Dr. Bergsma will get other students to continue the research with the parasites?
I hope so, because I think that the project, even while it may not seem the most appealing to everyone at first, you get to learn a lot about the just ecology of local areas. And so I think it's really important to continue the research, especially as we're making ground on some kind of newer stuff that hasn't even been published on Elkhorn Slough and stuff like that. So I definitely think he'll continue it, because I continued it from a student 2 years ago, and she continued it from a student that was working like 2 years earlier or something like that. So it's been going for a little bit.
What advice would you give researchers or people who want to start research?
I'd say start it as early as you can. That was one of my biggest mistakes, is I waited until my junior year to really get into research. Just get into it as soon as possible and make as many connections, because I found if you just have options to do, it's a lot easier than kind of selecting from a very small pool of things to do. But yeah, even if it's just for volunteer, even if you're not doing it for UROC or for a different organization, just kind of getting your foot in the door is amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Liam. I really enjoyed listening about your research. I've never seen a research topic like yours, so yours is very unique, and like I said, I really enjoyed it. So thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed being on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining Otterly Curious. I hope you enjoyed listening.
Killed it. Ate it up.
This is Jordan, aka Jay Swizzle, co-host of Otterly Curious. I also want to let you guys know that this is the last episode that I'll be co-hosting before I graduate. Thank you guys for your support, and I'll see you all soon.
Otterly Curious is made possible in part by a grant between the HSI Equity Hub at CSU Northridge and Apple, aimed to catalyze HSI programming throughout the CSU system, statewide and nationally.
If you're an undergraduate researcher interested in sharing your story on our podcast, Otterly Curious, please visit the UROC office and talk to Eric Barajas, our outreach specialist, or just let us know in the comments.
Thank you.